Hello and welcome back to our channel. According to a report by Statista in 2023, SQL injection remains the most common critical vulnerability in web applications, accounting for 23% of all instances. Yes, you heard that right. In this video, we will explain you how SQL injection works and how to spot vulnerabilities. We will also cover the best ways to prevent these attacks and explore the different types of SQL injection and their impacts. By the end of this video, you will know how to safeguard your applications from this serious threat. Let's get started. So here in this video, we will be discussing about the introduction to SQL injection first, and we will understand the basic definition of SQL, after which we will be understanding how the SQL injection actually works, and we'll also understand few vulnerabilities that are present, and different types of SQL injection attacks will also be discussed. SQL injection techniques. So what are the different techniques that are present to do the SQL injection will also be known to you. Impact of SQL injection will also be discussed, along with how the prevention and mitigation can be done in order to avoid or escape from your SQL injection. So these are the topics that will be covered in this particular video. First, let's understand what SQL injection is all about. Imagine you go to a restaurant and instead of ordering from the menu, you tell the chef to put whatever you want in your dish. Now, think of a website that asks you to enter your name. What if instead of just your name, you sneak in some secret code? That's what SQL injection is. SQL, it stands for Structured Query Language, which is a fancy way of saying it's the language used to talk to databases where websites store their information. Injection. This means putting something into a place where it wasn't originally meant to go. How does it happen? When a website asks you for information like your username, it usually sends that information to a database to check if you are registered. If the website isn't careful, someone could add some extra sneaky code into the input box and the website will send it straight to the database. This extra code can trick the database into doing things it wasn't supposed to do, like showing all the usernames and passwords. A simple example. Let's say a website asks for your username. Normal input that you give is John123, but the malicious input here is John123 hyphen or -1 hyphen is equal to -1. In this malicious input, the code or -1 hyphen is equal to -1 is designed to trick the database into thinking that anyone can log in, not just John123. So why is SQL injection such a significant concern? Here are a few reasons. High impact. SQL injection can lead to severe data breaches, financial loss or damage to an organization's reputation. Widespread vulnerability. Even the smallest vulnerability in your code can be exploited, making it a common target for attackers. Ease of execution. Many SQL injection attacks are simple to perform, requiring minimal technical skill from attackers. Prevention and mitigation techniques. Input validation techniques. Validate all user inputs to ensure they conform to expected formats, lengths, and types. Implement both client-side and server-side validation to catch any malformed input early. Use whitelisting, allowing only specific input formats instead of blacklisting, blocking known malicious patterns. Employ regular expressions for strict input validation, particularly for sensitive data like email addresses or passwords. Avoid accepting direct user input for critical operations. Instead, sanitize the encode inputs to prevent injection attacks. Using prepared statements and parameterized queries. Always use prepared statements with parameterized queries to prevent SQL injection attacks. Avoid dynamic SQL queries that concatenate user inputs directly into SQL statements. Ensure that all input data is treated as a variable and not executable code by the database engine. Use ORM frameworks that support parameterized queries to manage database interactions securely. Regularly review and update query patterns to maintain and secure coding patterns. Employing web application firewalls. Deploy WAFs to filter and monitor HTTP requests, blocking potential attacks such as SQL injection and cross-site scripting. Regularly update WAF rules and signatures to protect against newly discovered vulnerabilities. Configure WAFs to log and alter on suspicious activities for proactive threat management. Use WAFs in conjunction with other security measures like secure coding and regular patching for a layered defense approach. Ensure WAFs are integrated into the bordered security infrastructure, including SIEM, that is Security Information and Event Management Systems. Next, we will understand why is it important to understand SQL injection. Knowing what SQL injection is, we all are aware that SQL injection should be prevented, right? So, we will understand why is it important to understand what SQL injection is. So, the very first thing is critical for maintaining data integrity and privacy. You have to know SQL injection because you have to actually maintain the data integrity, which means the accuracy, the consistency, or the data should be maintained accurately throughout your project lifecycle or data lifecycle. And you also have to have the data privacy. So, for that regards, you have to know what SQL injection is. Next is, it protects against unauthorized data access. So, your knowledge of SQL injection can protect your data from the unauthorized users. You can also prevent the data breaches and leaks, which means data breaches is nothing but you are giving your confidential data to be accessed by the unauthorized users. So, the data, which is very confidential, will be accessed by the hackers or the unauthorized users. Data leaks is nothing but the sensitive information or data is exposed to the unauthorized users, maybe due to human error or due to some SQL error and so on. So, that can also be a reason for you to first know what SQL injection is. Then it is essential for securing the web applications. So, whichever applications that you create on your websites or you maintain on your web will be secured. To know how to secure your web application, you should first know the SQL injection. It also helps in understanding and mitigating common attack vectors. So, you will be getting an awareness of how to prevent and mitigate your data from this SQL injection. Next, we will understand what SQL is. So, we all know that SQL is a query language that is actually used to interact with the databases. So, imagine you are running your own hospital or a restaurant. So, you will be maintaining a database. Say suppose you are running the hospital, you will have the list of doctors, you will have the list of patients and their diseases, their age, all their details, right? So, all that details will be stored in the database and you can interact with that database using this SQL query at the backend. Right. So, this is what a basic definition of SQL is. So, SQL is nothing but it's a structured query language that is used for managing and manipulating your databases, which means you can maintain your database and you can also manipulate, which means you can add data to it, you can delete data from your database, you can update your database. All these can happen to your databases, right? As I said, common operations all include select query, which means you can select a part of data from your database and you can work on it or you can have access to a selected data. You can insert data, which means if you want to add a new patient to your database, you can add that data into the database. Update. Say suppose you want to change the address of that particular patient, you can also update his or her address in your database. And delete. Say suppose that patient is actually changing the hospital and he doesn't want to continue with your hospital, then you can delete his data from your database. So all these operations can happen with respect to your database with this simple query language. Then it allows for querying, updating and deleting data. It is nothing but the same thing. You can use queries to communicate with your database. You can do updating, you can do deleting, you can do anything with respect to your database. It supports the database creation and schema modifications. So you have something called as SQL schemas and all in your database. If you want to know more about the schema modifications, you have to actually learn what database is. If you want to know more about the database courses, you can learn from one of our database video in our Great Learning platform. And it is also used to retrieve and modify data based on a specific condition. So you will have an option or an opportunity to write a specific query or an operation to do a specific operation. So all these things can be done using your SQL language. So having understood the SQL definition, we will now go through few basic SQL commands that is used in our daily basis. One is your select. So select query is always used to retrieve a specific data from one or more tables. For example, select name age from users where age is more than 30. So what does this query do? It will select the names from all the tables where the user's age is greater than 30. So whoever user's age is greater than 30, all those users' names will be displayed. So this is how you can write the queries. Next is your insert. It actually, as I said, it actually adds a new row or column to your database. So it adds new rows to a table. For example, you can insert into users name, age, values, John and 25, which means you'll be inserting into your table where the user name is John and value is nothing but the age, which is 25. So this is how you can write queries to insert data into your database. Next is your update. So it modifies the existing record. As I said, update is nothing but you'll update. Say suppose your age is 30 there. You want to make it 31 next year. So you can update that age as 31 by using this query, that is update. So update users set age is equal to 26 where name is equal to so and so. So you will be updating the age as 26 where the name is John. Then delete. As I said, as the name says, delete is nothing but you can remove any record from your database or table by just giving the command as or the query as delete from users where name is equal to so and so. So this is how the SQL basic commands can be given in your database. Now we will see how exactly the SQL injection works. So here SQL injection is nothing but having understood the SQL query, this SQL injection is nothing but it is a malicious code that you will be adding into the query when writing your query. So all this malicious code will be written by hackers. So SQL injection is a code injection technique that exploits vulnerabilities in a web application's input validation to execute malicious SQL commands. As I said, say suppose I am an outsider and I want to access the database of your hospital. Now I can write a SQL code with a SQL injection. I can put that malicious code into my SQL query and I can access the database of your hospital. Yes, you heard me right. This is possible. So we'll see what exactly the SQL injection is, how it works and what are the types involved in it and all of that. So the mechanism is nothing but attackers insert or inject SQL queries through input fields to manipulate the database. So how can I actually access your database? Given a field to enter my name or to enter my phone number, in those places, I can use those fields to actually inject the malicious SQL codes. So this is the mechanism, how it actually happens in a basic term. So what is the goal here? What is my intention now? I want to steal your sensitive data. That is my main intention, right? So the goal here is to gain unauthorized access. So I'm not an authorized person to access your database. So it is someone who is unauthorized. So it is an unauthorized access, or I'm retrieving your sensitive data, or I am altering your database content. My intention can be anything. I want to retrieve some sensitive data that you're actually stored in your database, or I can also alter some data in your database. Say suppose I am an hacker or some unauthorized person who wants to change the patient's name in your database. I will log into your database using these kind of malicious codes, and I will change the name there. So all this can happen, right? So that is the main goal or intention of the SQL injection. So how the attack flow happens? So input submission. As I said, attackers inputs the malicious SQL code into a form or an URL. I can use the URL also to inject or input the malicious code. Then the execution will happen. So application processes the input as part of an SQL query. So the application that is running in the background of your database will actually think that the SQL query is correct and it will execute it. That is the execution step. Then the database interaction. So once that SQL query is executed, I can interact with your database. So that is the third step here. So malicious code is executed now and it affects the database. So I can use your entire database by using that malicious code. So hope you understood the basics of how and what exactly is SQL injection, right? So next, we will see some common types of SQL injection attacks. So the very first one is the classic SQL injection. It's very simple and it is the classic one. Why? Because it just injects the SQL commands directly into the query strings. So the query that we write, it will directly inject this malicious code there only. So for example, I will just inject the quotes here, single quotes, or 1. Can you see the single quote between the 1 is equal to 1. So this can be done to access the data on your database. So this is the classic SQL injection. So the next one is the blind SQL injection. So what can you understand from this word blind SQL injection? So it's something, blind means what? You can't see anything. So this blind SQL injection is that nothing can be seen on your query, or nothing can be seen how the data is actually accessed by this malicious code. At least in classic SQL injection, we have some quotes there. So we can, we in the sense the administrators also can understand that it is some malicious code, or an attacker also can easily know that he has written some malicious code. But here in blind SQL, nothing will be seen on your codes. That is the advantage of this blind SQL. So what happens here is that no visible data is returned. So data that is returned is also not visible. Attacker infers data through Boolean responses or time delays. So how he will actually access the data is through these Boolean responses, which means true or false, and with some few time delays. So based on time delays, he can actually access your database. For example, we have a query where select star from users where ID is equal to 1 and 1 is equal to 1. Can you see any malicious code here? No, right? So it is blind. So these are called as blind SQL injection. Next is error-based SQL injection. So by this name, what you can understand is, me as an attacker or an hacker, I will actually send some malicious code to encounter some errors in your database. So based on that error execution, I can retrieve the data. So that is the intention here. Relies on database error messages to gain information. So I will trigger that errors to happen in your database by writing the SQL queries, and then with that error, I can actually access the database. So this is one example where you can write query as select star from where users ID is equal to 1, union select null. So by writing these kind of malicious queries, I will trigger the error into your database system. From there, I can gain some information. Next is union-based SQL injection. So as the name suggests, I am using the union keyword to retrieve the data from your database. So uses the union operator to combine results from multiple queries. Example is given here. So select name, email from users union select null. So I'm using that operator here in order to retrieve the data from your database. So these are some types of SQL injection attacks. Next is finding vulnerabilities. Identifying potential SQL injection points in web applications. So what all points can be considered in web application is to be known now. One is input field, as I told, your login forms or your URLs or the search bars or the contact forms are all the forms of the input fields where SQL queries can happen. So look for user inputs that are directly used in SQL queries. Next is your URL parameters. As I said, query strings in URLs that interact with the database. So these kind of ID is equal to 1 in your URL can actually interact with your database. So be conscious about these as well. Next is your cookies and headers. So values passed through cookies or HTTP headers. For example, cookie session ID is equal to 12345. So these session IDs can also cause your SQL injection. Then is your application behavior. Be very watchful of your activities of your application or behavior of your application. So watch for unusual application behavior or error messages that may indicate injection points. So these are few points or weaknesses where the SQL injection can happen. So we have to be aware of all these things when you are actually reviewing or validating your points where malicious attacks can happen. Common input fields and scenarios vulnerable to SQL injection are, as I said, login forms. So username and password fields also can be used to input the malicious codes. So for example, your select query from users where username is user and password is pass. So user in the place of username and password also the attack can happen. So the SQL injection can happen. Next is your search fields. So user search terms that are used to generate queries. So for example, if you want to search for some data on your database, you will write search queries, right? So you can write query as select from products where name like input, right? So you will write queries by using select keyword to actually retrieve some data or to search some data. So these kind of queries can also cause the SQL injection. Next is again URL parameters. So values passed in query strings that are used in database queries. For example, I told you ID is equal to 1. So this is again causing the SQL injection. And your contact forms. So fields where users input data that is stored or processed by the backend. For example, insert into messages where you give the name and the message, values as name and your message. For example, you are giving the age of John is 40. So that is also an input that you are actually giving to your query to access your database. So these kind of queries also can cause your SQL injection. So we have to always be aware of these points where the SQL injection can happen. Next, we will see the types of SQL injection attacks. As I said, there are different types, right? So we'll see one by one. So the very first one is in-band SQL injection. What is that actually? So the in-band SQL injection is a very straightforward type of SQL injection where the attackers use the same communication channel for launching the attack and retrieving the results or the data from the database. For example, I am using the same communication channel to send my malicious code, that is nothing but the SQL injection, and I'll use the same communication channel to access the data, or I will retrieve the data from there. So this is called as in-band SQL injection. So there are again two subtypes of this in-band SQL injection. We'll see what those are. One is the error-based SQL injection, as I've already discussed. Error-based is nothing but it relies on the error message returned by the database to gain information, right? Which means I'm sending an error or triggering an error into your database, and using that I am gaining some information, which is called as in-band SQL injection. The second subtype is nothing but union-based SQL injection. As we have already understood this, we are using the union operator to retrieve the data from the database, right? So uses the union SQL operator to combine results from multiple queries into a single result. So these two SQL injection methods, that are nothing but the error-based SQL injection and the union-based SQL injection, comes under the in-band SQL injection, right? So next, what are the characteristics of this in-band SQL injection? One is it is very easy to execute and it is very easy to identify as well. And it provides the immediate feedback to the attacker. It is very easy for the attacker to actually use the data from your database by using this in-band SQL injection method. For example, query can be written as, generally the query can be written as select star from users where ID is 1. But when I use in-band SQL query, how can I inject that? So select star from users where ID is equal to 1. And here I am using union operator. This is called as union-based SQL injection, right? So union select username password from admin. So I am just using the union operator to actually do the SQL injection here. So what is the output here? Everything can be accessed from your database. How to prevent your database from this in-band SQL injection? You can provide the proper input validation. You can do your input validation. When the input is given, you can actually validate it, whether the input given or the query written is proper or not. And suppressing error messages. So whenever that, as I told you, error-based SQL injection will trigger an error, right? But what if you suppress the error messages? What if you don't actually give an opportunity for that error messages to happen or error to execute? So that can also be suppressed. And using parameterized queries. So you can also avoid this in-band SQL injection by using the parameterized queries. These are some methods that you can use in order to avoid the in-band SQL injection. Next, we will see the types of in-band SQL injection attacks. So we will actually understand what error-based SQL injection is in depth. We already understood that error-based SQL injection is nothing but it is triggered by an error caused by the attacker, right? So it is a type of in-band SQL injection where the attacker uses the database error messages to gather information about the database structure. This we already know. This has a mechanism. We will see what the mechanism is. So the attacker triggers an error in the database. Error messages reveals the details such as table names, column names, and the data types. So these are the error messages that are actually revealed to the attacker. They can be the data table names or the column names or data types only. So using these details, the hacker can easily hack the data or retrieve the data from the database. For example, this is the query that we actually usually write, that is select star from users where ID is equal to 1. So what is the malicious code now? What is that injection or the SQL injection that is happening here? Select star from users where ID is equal to 1. And can you see this is and 1 is equal to convert int select and version, which means some table name or some malicious code is actually sent in order to create or trigger that error. Result is nothing but database error message displays and the SQL server version is displayed. So what is happening here? Everything is displayed to the hacker and he uses all those data in order to retrieve data from the database. What is the impact here? It can lead to the discovery of valuable information for further exploitation. As I said, those data can be used to access the database, right? How can this be avoided now? So, disable detailed error messages. So, we can avoid this by not displaying the detailed error messages. We can also avoid this by implementing custom error handling. So, we can use this method that is called as custom error handling in order to avoid the errors that are actually triggered by the hacker. And we can also use the secured coding practices. We can use good coding practices to identify these kind of malicious attacks or error-based SQL injection. The next one is the union-based, right? Now we will understand what this union-based SQL injection is in detail. As we all know, we are just using the union operator in order to retrieve or do the attack here, right? So it is a type of in-band SQL injection that exploits union-based SQL injection is a in-band SQL injection that exploits the union SQL operator to combine the results of multiple queries into single output. So here we are using the select queries. So we'll see the mechanism here. So the attacker appends a malicious query using union operator, right? We already know this. The results of the malicious query are combined with the results of the original query. So union is doing what here? It is actually combining the malicious query with the original query, and it will do the SQL injection attack here. What is the example here then? So we generally write the queries as select name, age from users where ID is equal to 1. But the union-based SQL injection can happen by using this query. Select name, age from users where ID is equal to 1 by using the union operator now. So union select username, password from admin. So this is the malicious code or the query from here. Union select name, password from admin. This is the malicious query and this is the original query, that is select name, age from users where ID is equal to 1. So this original query is combined or united with the malicious query to do the union-based SQL injection. So the result is nothing but it displays both user information and the admin credentials. So from there, you can do the hacking. Characteristics. So it is very effective in retrieving multiple data sets. It requires knowledge of database schema sometimes. We can avoid this union-based SQL injection by using parameterized queries. And we can also limit the use of union operator. We don't want to use union operator. That's better, right? We can avoid this union-based SQL injection only. And here we can also enforce some strict access controls. Next, after understanding what is in-band SQL injection, next we will understand what is blind SQL injection. We already know the definition of this, but we will understand this in detail. So blind SQL injection is more subtle form of SQL injection where no error messages or visible output is returned. The attacker infers information by observing the behavior of the application. So I will send my malicious code using my blind SQL injection, say suppose to access your database. But no error message will be displayed. I will not give you any clue of malicious code. But with my query that I give using blind SQL injection, some behavior will happen on your database or on your application. So I will observe that behavior that is happening on your application. Based on that behavior, I will be able to access the data on your database. So we will see how this can happen. So again, in blind SQL injection, we have two types. We'll see what those are. One is Boolean based blind SQL injection. As I said, it will give the Boolean output to actually understand your SQL injection. So what happens here is attacker sends query that return true or false condition. So based on that true or false condition, the hacker will be able to understand what he can do next in order to retrieve the data. So this condition can be used to infer the database structure. The second one is the time-based blind SQL injection. So here, as the name says, time-based, it's nothing but the delays. So based on delays, the hacker can identify what he can be doing next. So attacker uses time delays in queries to infer information. So based on the delays, he can actually get more information from your database. We'll see these two in detail now. Boolean based example. So the query is very simple here. Select star from users where ID is equal to 1 and 1 is equal to 1. So true condition. So I can change this query into the blind SQL injection by injecting the query like this. Select star from users where ID is equal to 1 and 1 is equal to 2. I am just changing the value. So it becomes false condition. So this is how I can inject blind SQL injection. So the result is different application behavior reveals true or false condition. So based on this true or false condition, I'll be able to hack the data on the database. This is how the Boolean based SQL injection can happen. Now we will see time based example. So this is the query. Select star from users where ID is equal to 1. But I can inject the query as select star from users where ID is equal to 1. Wait for delay of some seconds, that is 5 seconds. So this is the malicious code that I am actually adding here. So the result is a delay in response. Time reveals the injection. So this is the time-based SQL injection method. How can we prevent this? We can implement the strict input validation. So whatever input is given, we have to validate it very strictly by concentrating on each and every character that is present in the SQL query. Next, we can also use parameterized queries here, and we can also employ monitoring tools to detect unusual application behavior. We can use other tools, external tools, which actually identifies this unusual behavior of our application. So we will get to know that something is happening to our application or someone is trying to access our application and all of those. So this is about the blind SQL injection attacks. So here are few methods now. We'll see what these are. Bypassing login forms. As name suggests, I am bypassing some login form. So in your login form, say suppose there are 2 fields. That is your name, username and password. Say suppose I am trying to access your Instagram account. So what will be the 2 fields that is very important to log in into your Instagram account? It is the username and your password. So that login form is very important to log in into your account, right? So I will be bypassing that login form. I will be giving some SQL injection codes in the fields of your username and password, and I will bypass that login form and I will access your Instagram and I will hack it. This is what happens in the bypassing login forms. So we will see what this is in detail. So main objective of this bypassing login form is to access the application, right? You will gain the unauthorized access to an application. So me accessing your Instagram is nothing but I am getting an unauthorized access. You didn't give me the authority to access your account, right? So it is an unauthorized access. So the method is nothing but we are inputting the SQL code directly into the login fields by bypassing the authentication, as I said. So the common injection here is the query can be written as select star from users where username is nothing but admin and password is this. This is how a normal correct SQL query should be written. But how will the injection SQL query be here? So the injected query is, as you can notice the difference, select star from users where username is admin. So after admin, that is your username, I am giving 2 hyphens here. So that is my SQL injection code or the malicious code. Are you understanding? And then the password can be anything. It need not be your password. I can use your username and give a malicious code along with your username that is nothing but the hyphen, that is the SQL injection code, and I am least bothered about your password. I can give 0 as password to log in into your account, right? So result is nothing but the access granted without knowing the password. As I said, I don't care about your password. So this is how the bypassing login forms actually work or happen, or how the attackers use this process. Right? I'll show a small simple demo for this. So how can you avoid this bypassing login forms? Use parameterized queries always, and then implement strong input validation. So keep your username and passwords very different, unique, or in a way that nobody can know what is your username. Retrieving hidden data from databases. So data that is hidden in your databases also can be accessed. So what is the overview here? The main objective is to extract the hidden data or the sensitive data or the confidential information that is stored in your database. Here the methods that are used are crafting SQL queries to retrieve additional data. So the SQL query, that the common correct SQL query is select name, age from users where ID is equal to 1. How can I convert this SQL query into an injected query now? Select name, age from users where ID is equal to 1. Union is always a villain here. So union select username password from admin. So this is the malicious query and this is the original query. I am using the union operator to actually access your hidden data. Result is nothing but access to admin credentials or hidden data. So the access will be given. How can it be prevented? Enforce strict access controls. You have to make the access control very strict so that the access should not be revealed to the hackers. And again, here also you can use the parameterized queries. The next method is the exploiting SQL injection vulnerabilities. So what happens here? The main objective is to exploit the vulnerabilities in the web application. So methods that are used are bypassing authentication. As I said, injecting into a login form. Wherever the login fields are there, directly write the SQL injection there and you bypass the login forms. And data exfiltration, which means retrieving hidden or sensitive data, as we already saw. Modifying the data. So injecting queries to alter the data in your database records. So these are few methods that can actually be used to do the SQL injection. So common techniques here are nothing but the in-band SQL injection that we saw, where you use the common communication channel to both inject the SQL injection and also to retrieve data. So direct interaction with database using union or error-based techniques. We can also use the blind SQL injection, so which is actually inferring data through application behavior by using the Boolean based SQL injection or time based SQL injection. So these are the common techniques that are used here. So how to avoid this? It can be avoided by doing the security test. That is nothing but regular security testing can be done, that is called as penetration testing, and also by implementing the web application firewalls. So firewalls are the best that you can use in order to avoid all these SQL injections. Here the main intention is to make you understand what are these different SQL injections that are present. Please do not try these SQL injections on any of your applications or any others sensitive or the confidential data. We are here trying to understand what exactly is SQL injection, what are the methods that you can actually use in order to know what SQL injection is and to avoid the SQL injection to happen on your databases, and how we can protect our data or databases from the hackers is our main intention here. Right? Here we will see few best practices to secure your data by using the secure coding. So the very first one is to follow secure coding guidelines. So to follow secure coding guidelines, we can use the security standards, that is OWASP, which is Open Web Application Security Project, and we can also use CERT, that is nothing but the Computer Emergency Response Team. So we can use these standards to actually secure your coding by using the guidelines. Integrate security in SDLC, that is nothing but the software development life cycle of the project. So the second method or the practice that you can implement in your coding is the least privilege principle. Apply the least privilege principle. Regularly update the access controls. So all the access controls can be regularly updated in order to have the control on your access controls so that the attackers need not or will not be able to access your data. Regular code reviews. So pure security code reviews is done here, and also automate with static analysis. So static analysis can always be done in order to check your codes. Use of encryption. We all know what encryption is. So we are encrypting our data with some key so that the hacker will not be able to understand what our encryption is, and that can also be used. So encrypt data at rest and transit. Update cryptographic algorithms. So using encryptions, we can always secure our data. Continuous security training. So you can always have security training done for yourself and to the team. So continuous security training is very important, and you always promote security first mindset. So security should be there. Security mindset should be there for all the employees working in your team so that security will become the main aspect of your data. Next one is secure error handling. So use generic error messages, handle exceptions properly so that error messages also can be avoided or suppressed. Dependency management. Update dependencies regularly, scan and patch vulnerabilities. So be very cautious about managing your data so that you can secure your data from the hackers. So here I will show you a small demo of how the SQL injection vulnerability will allow the bypass login form. So I am using, as I said, I can give the SQL injection in this username field only and get the unauthorized access to the application. So I'll give the username as administrator and a single quote and with a hyphen here. As I said, this 2 hyphen is actually the SQL injection, what I'm actually doing here. So password can be anything. So I will give it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't care about the actual original password. I am just worried about giving the SQL injection into the username here, that is the double hyphen. So having known the username, I'm just giving the SQL injection to access the form here. And then I click on login. As you can see, it's actually revealing the username, the correct username, and it actually allowed the, it gave the unauthorized access here. I can also change the password. It is giving me the option of changing the password. So this is how I can do the bypassing of the login forms by using the SQL injection or the malicious code into the fields of username. In this video, we have covered the key aspects of SQL, providing a clear understanding of how databases are built and managed. We also discussed SQL injection, explaining how attackers can exploit weaknesses in code to gain unauthorized access to important data. We explored different types of SQL injection attacks, including in-band and inferential, and the methods hackers use to tamper with databases. We also discovered how to identify potential weaknesses in user systems, allowing issues to be caught before they are exploited. We wrapped up by discussing effective prevention and protection strategies, offering tools to secure applications against SQL injection threats. With this knowledge, databases can be better protected and systems can be kept safe from evolving cyber threats. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more updates on the latest in technologies. See you in the next video.